Click.
And just like that, you see the confirmation. It's instant, totally seamless.
But what's really going on here? Well, it's not how you think. That one simple action, it just kicked off a hidden, incredibly complex system.
You see, behind the scenes, your transaction is being sorted, processed, and actually bundled together with thousands of others. They're all being merged into one single package.
And this whole process, this is layer 2.
So what really happens after you hit send? That is the exact journey we're going to follow in this explainer.
Okay, before we dive in, just a quick note. This explainer here on the Blocks Bonds Funds channel is put together for educational and informational purposes only. It is not and should not be taken as financial or investment advice.
All right, so we're going to follow one single transaction all the way from start to finish. We'll break its journey down into 4 main parts. First, the click and the data. Then, we'll peek inside the Layer 2 engine. After that, we'll look at settlement on Layer 1. And finally, we'll talk about why this is all the scaling breakthrough everyone's so excited about.
All right, let's get started. We're going to follow the data, right from that very first moment, the click.
So let's start with the basics. What even is a transaction? Well, at its core, it's not just about money moving from A to B. It's actually a signed packet of data. And inside that packet, you've got instructions. You know, who gets what, maybe which smart contract to interact with, all bundled up and ready to go.
And it all starts with you, right? First, you sign the transaction with your private key. Think of that as your unique, impossible-to-forge digital signature. Once that's done, your wallet takes that signed packet of data and just broadcasts it out to the network.
Okay, and right here is the first super important detour. Your transaction doesn't just head straight for the main blockchain, something like Ethereum. Nope. Instead, it gets routed onto a much faster, way more efficient highway, a Layer 2 network. And honestly, this little detour is what makes everything else possible.
So that brings us inside the Layer 2 engine, and this is where the real magic of scaling happens. It's where thousands of different individual journeys all get prepared to travel as one.
So the very first stop for your transaction is a really important piece of the puzzle called the sequencer. You can think of it like the air traffic controller for this Layer 2 network. It's the one and only entry point, and its job is to manage the flow of every single transaction coming in. Now, this sequencer has a few really key jobs. First, it grabs your transaction and puts it in an orderly line. Then, and this is crucial, it executes it off-chain. That just means it does the calculation outside of the main blockchain. This is exactly why you get that instant feedback on your screen. The sequencer gives you what's called a soft confirmation. Basically, it's a promise saying, hey, we've got your transaction and it's going into the next batch.
So, after it's processed a whole bunch of these transactions, the sequencer does something pretty amazing. It rolls up hundreds, sometimes even thousands of them into one single consolidated group. And that right there is the core idea of a rollup. You're just combining a ton of transactions into one.
But just batching them up isn't quite enough. To make this whole thing hyper-efficient, the system then does some really aggressive data compression. It basically strips away all the stuff you don't absolutely need, like extra signatures or metadata, and leaves only the bare minimum required to prove the transaction took place. And it's simple, right? Less data means a smaller footprint on Layer 1, which directly translates to much, much lower fees for you.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how does the main blockchain trust that all this work done off-chain was actually done correctly? Good question. There are really 2 main ways this happens. You've got optimistic rollups, which are kind of like an innocent until proven guilty system. They just assume the batch is valid, but they leave a window open for anyone to challenge it if they spot an error. Then you have ZK rollups. They're more like guilty until proven innocent. They generate this really complex mathematical proof that guarantees every single transaction is correct before it's even submitted.
All right, let's move on to the final stage of our journey, settlement on Layer 1. So after all that off-chain processing, the batched and compressed data, plus its proof, finally makes its way back to the main blockchain. This is where the whole thing gets locked in and becomes secure.
Now, here's the key point. Layer 1 doesn't redo all the work and execute every single transaction again. It's way too busy for that. Instead, it has 3 really important jobs. First, data availability. It stores that compressed data so that anyone, anywhere, can check and verify the Layer 2's state. Second, and this is huge, is security. The Layer 2 batch inherits the full battle-tested security of the main blockchain. And third, it provides settlement. It becomes the final immutable record that this state change happened. It's the ultimate source of truth.
Okay, let's circle back for a second to that instant confirmation you got right at the start. Remember that? That amazing feeling of speed is what we call soft finality. It's basically the sequencer's promise to you that your transaction has been accepted and processed on layer 2. It's super fast, yeah? But it's not quite irreversible just yet.
You see, the full journey to what we call hard finality takes a little bit longer. So within seconds, you get that soft finality from the sequencer. Then, maybe a few minutes later, your transaction gets committed. That's when the batch officially gets posted to layer 1. But hard finality, the moment it becomes absolutely positively irreversible and cemented forever, that only happens once the layer 1 block that contains your batch is finalized by the main chain. And that can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, sometimes even longer.
Okay, so let's zoom all the way out and really understand why this whole kind of complicated pipeline is such a massive, massive breakthrough for the space.
So here it is, the whole thing in one view. You click send, instantly the layer 2 sequencer orders and executes it, which gives you that immediate success feeling. From there, it gets batched with others, the data gets compressed, and the whole package is sent down to layer 1. The main chain then just has to verify the proof and lock it in, giving it that permanent, rock-solid security. It's really just a brilliant system of delegation and verification.
So in the end, the big takeaway here is really a fundamental shift in how we think about this stuff. True blockchain scaling, it didn't come from trying to make a single chain infinitely faster. That was a dead end. Instead, it came from adding a new, super efficient layer right on top. This lets the main chain focus on what it does best, providing that ultimate security and settlement. So remember, the instant speed is kind of an illusion. The layers are the reality.